So today is our second webinar in the learning journey, Regenerating the Earth Through Collapse. Today, what we want to share with you is a framework for practical coordination and action up to the planetary scale that we have been laying groundwork for several years, as have many others. And now is the time to name it and to focus energy on manifesting it. And so the purpose of today's presentation is to share a visionary strategy that is very ambitious, that we feel is at the minimum scale of what is needed for regenerating the earth. And you'll see that we have taken care to gather feedback and sense making from several different places in the learning journey through the last 2 weeks to be able to inform how we move forward with what we're doing today and how we move forward into the community calls and the next integration session and so on. And we'll also start to give you a feeling for the bioregional pilgrimages that we have planned. And Penny and I are also really excited that this Friday, we get on an airplane and fly to Elias in Tunisia to make some preparatory planning work for what we'll be doing in September, and also to help catalyze another bioregional learning center into being. And so this strategy we're talking about today, we're jumping right in and we're doing it. And so we want to share our strategy with you, which we'll do in just a moment with a presentation that will last probably about a half an hour. And then after that, we'll have plenty of time for discussion, to answer questions, to explore what's emerging from the idea of having such an ambitious strategy. And then we're already giving thought to the next community calls and how we can shape conversations start to hold the complexity of what is involved. So just to make it very clear that theory and practice for us are not separated. They are integrated in the way we walk this path. And so like the last webinar, I'll sort of be the lead dancing monkey, as we like to say. I'll be giving most of the presentation today, but there will be a part that Penny will lead, and so we'll be collaboratively presenting today. And what we're really looking forward to doing is sharing this vision with you. And then, look, I already have short sleeves. I don't even need to roll them up. Is to get to work doing this. And so with that in mind, we just want to jump right into the presentation and then share this vision with you in more detail, and then come back and have discussion afterwards. So with that said, let's jump right in to here. So our presentation today is called The Dandelion Strategy for 1,000 Bioregional Learning Centers. One of the questions that I've been asked a lot over the years is when someone says, okay, everything's collapsing, where can I go that I'm going to be safe? Or more specifically, they might say, Joe, you moved to Barichara, Colombia. Why is that the most safe place? And I always tell them it isn't, because maybe nowhere on earth is safe. And honestly, we have no idea. We cannot say which places are more safe and which places are less safe because of the incredible and overwhelming complexity of the changes that are happening. And so I want to offer you a strategy that helps us deal with this ignorance. So I want to start with 3 different categories of knowledge. There's what we know, then there's what we know that we don't know, what we know that we're ignorant of, and then there's what we don't know we don't know. And I made that one bigger because how do you even know the boundaries of what you don't know that you don't know? But I think we can safely say it's huge. What we need is a strategy that works for all 3. A strategy that addresses what we know. For example, we know it's too late to stop abrupt climate change. Okay, we know that. What we don't know is exactly when and how extreme weather events are going to occur, where they're going to hit. What we also don't know, we don't know, is something like what weaponized artificial intelligence will do as technocratic psychopaths try to do the last resource grabs of the planet as our financial and global system is collapsing. Whoa. So there's what we know, what we don't know, but we know we don't know, and then what we don't know, we don't know. We need a strategy for all three. I want to show you a strategy for all three. I mentioned this in the last webinar. If you look at this dandelion growing in a crack in a sidewalk, no one could have predicted the exact location of this seed, or that it would actually find something to take root in, that there would be sufficient moisture for it to germinate and for it to grow above the cracks. A dandelion has a strategy that addresses all three categories of knowledge. So what we want to do is trust evolution to show us the way when we don't know where to plant seeds. We don't know which ones will germinate, and we don't know which ones will take root. The strength of this strategy is through diversity in numbers. The more people who embody this strategy and put it into practice, and the more places they put it into practice, the more likely this strategy is resilient. So we need to embrace the emergent process. So I'm going to only briefly mention what is a bioregional learning center, because we literally hosted a 6-month-long learning journey in 2024 called Birthing of Bioregional Learning Centers. And we encourage you to go to the videos and recordings there. And we'll explore this more later. All I want to say now about bioregional learning centers is that they are the coherent and holistic way of learning how to live in place at the scale of a bioregion, including what came before, how things came to be the way they are, and what needs to happen to regenerate our bioregions to make them healthy and harmonious into the future. So bioregional learning centers are integrated and holistic processes of collective intelligence for entire bioregions. Also, they're the only game in town. Back in 1971 and 1972, a very important book was written and published called Limits to Growth. Dana Meadows, who was the lead author of that report, which became the Limits to Growth study, throughout a period of 10 years between 1972 and 1982, gathered with people in a group called the Balaton Group, and the best sustainability thinkers of the day met all over the world at universities and conferences during a 10-year period. And this Balaton Group came out in an essay written by Dana Meadows in 1983 called A Brief History of the Balaton Group. And she said this: out of these 10 years of meetings with the best sustainability thinkers of the time came a vision of a number of centers where information and models about resources and the environment are housed. There would need to be many of these centers all over the world, each one responsible for a distinct bioregion. Or said another way, in 1983, the best strategy sustainability thinkers could come up with to bring the Earth back within planetary limits, which is to get to sustainability, was to create a planetary network of local living economies organized as bioregions, each one having a bioregional learning center. Guess how many better ideas have come about since 1983? 0. This is the only way to do it. So I wrote a book where I took ideas like these from people like Dana Meadows and offered the design pathway for how we create a planetary network of bioregions where local people create the learning pathways for regeneration at all necessary scales. And the design school was born from that. So our core focus is to create a planetary network of regenerative bioregions using bioregional learning centers. So how are we doing at implementing this strategy? Well, we want to offer a vision for the next 10 years as the collapse processes of the world intensify. Now, right now, there are what I would call several early stage bioregional learning centers. There's Bioregional Learning Center UK. There's Thera, which is in Tarn-et-Garonne in France, which is just getting started in the last 2 years. There is the work in Vale de Sinal in Brazil that has been going for about 10 years. There is the work that we've been doing on territorial regeneration in Bartachara, Colombia. There is Regenerate Cascadia, etc., and so forth. There are several early stage bioregional learning centers, but they're largely underdeveloped. They're still in their early days. They have a lot of work to do to mature, and they're isolated from each other and not working together. So what we want to do in the next several years is move toward regional hubs with bioregional learning sites, and I'll explain more about how we're doing that in a moment, and to arrive by 2035 with a planetary network of bioregional learning centers, or BLCs for short, all over the planet. So we in the design school are preparing to launch a BLC action network to support design school members who create their own bioregional learning centers. And we want to evolve this toward regional hubs. Regional hubs would be things like a network of learning sites in the Great Lakes with a Great Lakes hub, or a network of learning sites in Cascadia, like landscape hubs, which is what Regenerate Cascadia is doing now, coordinated with a Regenerate Cascadia hub. Similarly for the Amazon rainforest, the Himalayas, the Mediterranean, the rivers of the North Sea, and so forth. A dandelion strategy for seeding the world, because we estimate that there are somewhere between 500 and 2,000 bioregions on Earth. The reason we don't have an exact number is because each bioregion needs to emerge from its own local process, honoring its own local culture and its own local ecology. And it needs to emerge with a coherent, sovereign, and autonomous identity. No outsider can create a map of the bioregion because that is just a colonizer drawing maps. So we don't know the exact number, but we know that the number is somewhere between 500 and 2,000. So to hedge our bets, our ignorance, we think that there should be at least 1,000 BLCs in the world in the next 10 years. So to create this planetary network of BLCs, we need to ask very important questions like, how do we fund this? Now, those of you who have been with us in the design school for a while know that there are 31 recorded regenerative finance labs, and many of them deal with the Earth Regeneration Fund, how funding pools work for regenerating the Earth, how the Bioregional Activation Funding Pool operated last year to support early stage bioregional organizing, and so forth. For our purposes today, I just want to say that we need funding pools with flows of funding between them, between the planetary scale to regional scales, to local regenerative projects and processes. And we need this multi-scale nesting of funding pools to work. But what does the process look like, however we manage to do the funding, to create this planetary network? To make it understandable, we've divided it into 3 parts that you could think of as a sequential developmental process, or as processes running in parallel with different focus. One is what we call activate. In the activate stage, we're catalyzing bioregional imagination, helping people to think in this way, and learn about the BLC strategy. Learn what a bioregion is, learn about Earth regeneration, learn what bioregional learning centers are and how to create them, and so forth. This leads to people who are activated deciding that they're ready to form a local team and create their own new BLC that joins the network. This is the stage we call create a bioregional learning center. And as these BLCs join the planetary network, we have the stage or the process of circulate. Circulate is the continual exchanges within and among the BLCs in the planetary network. So let's go through each of these one at a time. The activate stage is basically everything we're doing in the design school right now. So in the design school, we have learning journeys where people learn about this strategy, they learn about bioregionalism, they awaken their bioregional imagination, they learn all kinds of things to activate them toward this strategy. We have tons of educational resources, 1,000 or more recorded sessions and webinars, and all kinds of group processes. We have an online community, and we have place-based hubs that have already formed and new ones that are forming. All of these are moving toward a threshold where specific people in this community say, I'm ready to create a BLC. But we also do bioregional activations and pilgrimages on the ground. So starting in 2022, Penny and I began doing bioregional activations. We did one in November of 2022 in the Central Rockies. That was the Front Range of the Colorado Rockies, as well as the Western Slopes. And then we did a bioregional activation in January and February 2023 in the Great Lakes. In May of 2023, we did an activation through the Colorado River Basin. In October of 2023, we did a 30-day bioregional activation that actually helped birth Regenerate Cascadia. Then in 2024, in April, we did a bioregional activation in the forests of the Northeast, sort of present-day New England and part of Nova Scotia. And then throughout 2025, we did bioregional activations in the Northern Andes and Colombia. And this year, we're planning bioregional pilgrimages into the Mississippi Basin, the Mediterranean, and Western Europe, where bioregional organizing is already happening. And so this is how we see the bioregional perspective in many different places over a short period of time and build capacities toward weaving at the planetary scale. As we do these pilgrimages and bioregional activations and travel through the landscapes, local people host local events to catalyze this way of thinking and invite people into the network. This is the primary way that people have become design school members in the last 3 years, by enrolling in a learning journey or hearing about us through a bioregional activation. So that's why in this learning journey, in June, we want to awaken the heart of the Mississippi Basin by doing a bioregional pilgrimage across the Mississippi Basin, starting in St. Louis, visiting major headwaters and confluences across this massive pinkish colored thing in the middle of North America. And then also in September and early October throughout the Mediterranean and Western Europe, where Penny and I will travel and design school members will be invited to host local gatherings to receive us or to receive local people in parallel with us if we're not in the same location, to awaken this bioregional imagination in lots of places and seed the idea that more people can create bioregional learning centers. The second stage of create is when someone decides they're ready to create their own BLC. So here we move toward regional hubs and bioregional learning sites all over the world. As Penny and I gather people together who will help us to design the BLC Action Network in the next few months, we're designing it for the people who want to create a bioregional learning center, meaning to be eligible to join this action network, you need to already have a BLC or have a team that is creating one. And you'll have to apply to join this network because this network will establish its own governance and coordination mechanisms among the members of the network for learning exchanges between bioregional learning centers and resource flows among them. So what kinds of things will we do in this action network? We'll do things like host leadership retreats and invite people who have founded bioregional learning centers to come together and develop strategies and share learnings with each other. To form regional hubs like a Mediterranean hub, a Great Lakes hub, a Northern Andes hub, and so forth. To establish funding pools and mobilize and share resources with each other. To cultivate shared capacities. An example of a shared capacity might be to create a shared GIS or Geographic Information Systems infrastructure for bioregional mapping, or a shared capacity for storytelling by pooling funding into a storytelling capacity to tell the stories of the BLCs in the Action Network. These are two examples. The other capacities would emerge from the governance of the Action Network itself. And also to coordinate efforts toward Earth regeneration. So what you can see here is that this Action Network is a critical piece of infrastructure for manifesting a planetary network. But as this BLC Action Network takes form, we want to enable continual exchanges among the BLCs. This could be learning exchanges. This could be sending teachers from one place to another. This could be financial flows. We could actually design a passport system and a currency system to mobilize resources and move them between bioregions. There is so much potential here. The idea that underlies it all and makes it coherent is to bring attention to the living flows of energy and resources that already exist for the planet, and dynamically align this planetary network with the restoration of health and vitality to Earth's biosphere. So as you can see in this image, which shows you the hydrosphere, or the water of the Earth, that we need to restore health to ocean currents, to watersheds, to mountains, to ecosystems, and that the BLCs can coordinate with each other to do this kind of work. So there might be a BLC network to regenerate the Amazon basin, just as an example. There are many different shared agendas that will emerge through the BLC network. So you could think of it like this. A bunch of bioregional learning centers form. This action network encourages and supports interactions and exchanges among them. And there's a continual flow of information, financial resources, infrastructure, tools, shared frameworks, etc., flowing across the network continuously, just as how water is continually flowing through the biosphere of the Earth. I want to remind us the time frame that we're doing this in. This is a graphic that I shared in the webinar 2 weeks ago to remind us that the human population is likely to reach its peak soon and begin to go down, and the people regenerating the Earth are only a subset of the population, and their population is probably going to go down too. So we have a really important challenge. How do we create resilience during collapse that is translocal? What is translocal? Basically, each bioregion everywhere on Earth needs to cultivate its own holistic approach to being resilient in its own place as disasters and collapse processes unfold. We need a translocal strategy, or a strategy for many locations at the same time in parallel, because many places will not survive the collapse process. We need to plant cultural seeds everywhere so that some of them can survive, and we need to help as many as possible to be resilient as we enter the most intense period of collapse, which will be the next few decades. So that's our strategy. How do we make this concrete and actionable? How do we land this into the learning journey itself? Well, remember that the learning journey runs from March through September for 6 months. It's divided into 2 parts: laying the groundwork and a time for design practice. The immersive experiences are the bioregional pilgrimages. And so what we need to do is increase the reach that this strategy reaches and gets to more people, more places, and more different kinds of flow, including financial flow, to enable this strategy to manifest throughout the learning journey and beyond it. And so one way that we could do this, that's annoying. Would you please let me
decline?
There we go, back to this. Lovely that that popped up. Okay, let me get back to the stage. One of the ways that we can do this is to share stories about the strategy as it's emerging. So I've already created a Substack a little bit more than a month ago, and I'm encouraging people to join me. So find Joe Brewer on Substack if you want to follow along and share resources there. Also, we encourage all of you as design school members to tell your own stories about how you are living out this strategy where you are. And we have Bioregional Earth that we co-founded, and Penny and I are co-stewards of, with Brian Pupa and Susan Bozak of the Legacy Project, where we will release regular bulletins of important news about what's happening with Bioregional Earth. So these are the ways that the stories can come out into the world. Please tell your stories and invite people into this process. Also, Penny and I have been working to design a new Earth Regenerators website that we will be implementing and publishing in the coming weeks when we can make time to do it. It's in our work plan. And this Earth Regenerators website will make this whole strategy visible and accessible to the public. Also, we have a design school funding pool that I'll talk about in a moment that will catalyze actions to enable these stories to emerge. And we have a bioregional pilgrimage through the Mississippi Basin in the month of June, and a bioregional pilgrimage into the Mediterranean and Western Europe in September and October that will catalyze this further and bring this conversation to more places as we move toward the launch of the BLC Action Network later this year. So the learning journey is helping to scaffold this process and strengthen it as we go in the coming months. So one of the parts of this strategy is funding pools. So funding pools for manifesting this strategy are really important. And I want to tell you about one that you may not even know you're already participating in, which is that design school membership dues go into a funding pool. And that funding pool has already been funding design immersions to begin to catalyze bioregional organizing. It has already been funding bioregional activations. It funds the existence of this technology platform and these learning journeys. It funds people to be community stewards of the design school. And so your membership dues are already funding this strategy simply by paying your $5 a month or $50 a year. And now we have a new level that I'll talk about in a moment. But this is how we're moving toward the planetary network of BLCs by just being members of the design school and paying our membership dues. So you're not paying membership dues for a learning journey, you're contributing into a funding pool for regenerating Earth through this planetary network. And because we've now had more than 1,400 people pay design school membership dues, we have more than 1,400 unique contributors into this funding pool in the last 3 years, and that number is growing every time a new member joins us. And we have deployed more than $500,000 into the creation of bioregional funding ecosystems, bioregional activations, design immersions, and other processes through the design school in the last 3 years, and we need to deploy a hell of a lot more than that. And you might have seen about a week ago, we revealed a new lifetime membership to the design school for $500 to get the Active Hope membership plan. And if we can get 50 new people to join this Active Hope plan, we'll raise $25,000 for this year's bioregional pilgrimages to help further plant seeds of BLCs in North America, the Mediterranean, and Europe. And of course, we have a much larger strategy for nested funding pools. And we have a vision for an Earth Regeneration Fund for 1,000 BLCs, but I don't want to go into the details of that now. We'll be sharing that when we have the material ready to share. So more on this later in the learning journey. Just to say that we envision raising $1 billion or more if we're able to find people who are aligned with this purpose, because we're going to need to flow a lot of resources into a network with 1,000 bioregional learning centers. So we can lean into the structure of this learning journey to get started. As we mentioned before, there are bi-weekly webinars with community calls and integration sessions. So we can adapt the strategy that we're presenting here to what is emerging through the different presentations and discussions. And we can seed new places where BLCs might be born in the future through these bioregional pilgrimages that we have planned as part of the learning journey. And it's at this point that I want to pass it over to Penny to share some of the sense making and how we can do this very concretely starting now in this learning journey.
So I wanted to talk about just in a little bit different direction, talk about some of the themes that keep arising, that are arising already in this learning journey and that have been arising in all of our past learning journeys from all of you who are participating in the learning journeys. And these are questions that come up when we start to feel into this strategy and we're aligned on the strategy and we want to do bioregional organizing and we want to get involved as individuals. Then we maybe start practicing or start trying it. We run into all of these questions around how do we do this? All of the obstacles start to arise. Or we just have it in we know the obstacles that are there. And so these are the questions that all of you are bringing up. And I just want to go through some of these major themes that we've seen throughout this learning journey already and throughout past learning journeys. So Joe's gonna go. You can sort of read these as I'm going through some of this. I'm just gonna name some of these things. It depends on where you are in your process, but one of the first things that comes up for people who are new to this, who are thinking about, okay, I think I want to form a team. I think I want to find the others to do this with, but how do I find them? Because I'm in this place where there's almost nobody thinking this way. So how do I find the team with people who have sufficient time? They have the collapse acceptance. They have the relational skills that would be needed for this team. They have aligned worldviews. They have the availability to devote to it. So how do you find the people to form the teams with? So that's one of the major things that comes up. And then as you're starting to organize, how do you start to relatedly, how do you inspire others in your community to actually collaborate with this into this kind of project, I guess you could call it, into a bioregional learning center, into even just the organizations in your area? How do you start to weave them so that they're actually collaborating toward a bigger vision together? So that is a huge question. The people in your bioregion, the groups, the organizations, the governing bodies, how do you start to weave those and inspire cooperation so that they're even thinking in this way? So you could think about that like there's a lot of groups doing regenerative work, but they're not necessarily thinking bioregionally, or they're in a silos and they're competing for funding, or they're not collapse accepting or collapse aware. So there's different like worldviews happening in your bioregion. So this is a major area that comes up. Another area that comes up a lot is how do we get the youth involved in this? How do we get the younger generations involved, and how do we start to create that intergenerational dynamic, especially with the youth now being so captured in the extractive system, that how do we free them to be involved in this and even get them thinking this way? And then the indigenous, how do we work with indigenous communities, indigenous knowledge systems, and keep the knowledge system sovereign but interacting? And how do we work in urban settings? This comes up all the time. This is a major theme that comes up. What does this mean for when you're in a city? Like, how do you do this when you're living in a city? And then some of the inner work questions around how do we stay balanced in ourselves, in our communities, stay whole and emotionally supported, and try to find some kind of joy and peace in this work, to stay devoted and connected as collapse accelerates and we're in these more and more intense situations. And how do we do the decolonization work that's needed for us to even be able to get started, really? I mean, it's the core of what we're doing. Cultivating trust, all the relational, interpersonal work that's needed. How do we do that? The trauma work, all of that kind of work. And then what Joe was touching on, how do we do the funding? How do we fund this in our own bioregions, but also across our bioregions? How do we do governance in a new way? And then how do we share our learnings and knowledge in a way across or inside our bioregions and also across our bioregions, so that we're not reinventing the wheel? That comes up a lot. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We already have a lot of this knowledge, but how do we share it in real time? And then another one sort of around the inner work, but it's it's more existential, is how do we navigate, how do we live in this time in between worlds, in between systems? How do we actually like function when we're caught in the extractive system, but we're trying to build the new system? That paradox, that balance, how do we live in that? That comes up a lot. And yeah, I think that's where I'll stop for now. But there's, the one other thing is just how do we balance between collapse, basically response to all the crisis that will be happening in our regions, and preparing, and also resilience to those. How do we prepare to be resilient? And how do we prepare for these collapse processes while also building these for the new world at the same time? It's like, that's sort of the same question of in between worlds. How do we do both, especially in this time of collapse?
So what we want to do is use the structures we've created in this learning journey to help support us to do breakouts into thematic focus areas, to decide if we create focused work groups or not, and who would lead them, and how to implement this strategy as the learning journey unfolds throughout the next several months. So just as a reminder, we have this 2-week cycle of a webinar on Tuesday, a community call Thursday and the following Tuesday, and also an integration session the following Tuesday. And then on the following Thursday, for those who join the And Now What space, there's also Courageous Conversations. But we have these different hosted sessions that are connected with the learning journey. And what happens is that topics come up, like the ones Penny just named, that we can bring into the community calls and the integration sessions as they emerge. So the idea is that we gather the sense making. So what Penny just shared with you is sense making that we gathered in the last 2 weeks, so that we can shape the containers. Here we mean the conversational spaces for what happens next. So we will be inviting specific topics for the breakout sessions of the community calls this Thursday, based on the sense making that Penny just shared, so that we can weave these hosted sessions, the webinars, community calls, and integration sessions, into the strategy on a rhythm of bi-weekly cycles. And then we can manifest the capacities we need as we move through the learning journey in the next 6 months and beyond. So this is how we see the structure of the learning journey supporting us to manifest and give birth to this strategy in the world starting now. And just as a reminder that we need a strategy that works for what we know, what we don't know, and what we don't know that we don't know. And that's what the Dandelion strategy for 1,000 bioregional learning centers enables us to do. So that's the end of the presentation. And what we want to do is to open a space now for discussion. Questions, comments, ideas, knowing that we have our next community call in 2 days and that this process is going to continue. So does this strategy sound crazy? Does it sound necessary? Is it exciting? Do you want to be part of it? Do you already see yourself as being part of it? Even if you may have used different words to describe what you do. What we see here is that in one sense, it's probably already too late for this strategy, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And if it's not too late, it will be because of what we don't know that we don't know. If we think we know it's too late, then it's definitely too late. But if we can add a little bit of humility back in, which by the way is a healing process in ourselves, to sit with the grief of what's happening, then we might just stumble into a way through this. Because really at a deep level, we don't know how bad the collapse is going to be. There are some things we can say with confidence, but other things we can't. And we need to be smart, but also humble. as we do this work? All right, I see some hands starting to come up. So Heather, over to you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. So many nuggets. I was furiously taking notes and screenshots, and I'll be visiting it again. I think for me, one of the things you just said around like maybe it's too late, maybe we can't make it, there's that percolating, I think, for me, but also reflecting on my last 10 years, at the beginning of that decade, there was a question of how do we transform government to be more resilient and more responsive to the needs of the public, knowing that it wasn't called collapse, but we knew there were demographic challenges and geopolitical challenges and climate challenges. So inside of government, public servants were saying, well, we need to do it differently. We have to learn from each other. We have to be able to deploy resources in a way that's thoughtful and that meets the need of the moment. And so a gritty, small, weird group of people got together and said, let's do that. Let's create, we called it, in various iterations, it eventually became the exchange. And what has emerged from that was the broader system going, oh, these people figured out how to deal with the stuff that is really challenging us now. Let's take that, and that seed now can grow into something else. There are questions that I have around, was that seed planted fast enough, and is the soil ready to receive it inside of the rest of government? That's a live question for me. And so back to your point of like, is it too late? Well, you don't know until you try. And so that's what's happening now. I'm taking a break from that world because I think it's more important to pay attention to what you've been describing. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And I would say that, yes, I want to be a part of this. And I guess my next question around, if I'm thinking about the problems or challenges I see, it's like there's so much to be excited about. How do we prioritize where to put our feet next? Which is also a set of skills I think I've been able to develop inside of government, and that could be applied elsewhere. But I'm wondering if you all have any advice or experience that you might be able to share either now or perhaps in a future session.
Thank you, Heather, for that testimonial, I guess I would call it, sharing your story. One comment about collapse is that if we wanted to go into collapsology and the study of collapse, we would discover there are different kinds, there are different models, and they're all happening in different places. But one of the ways that we can think about collapse, that's a more of a positive one. I'll leave the negative ones for another moment. But a positive one is the breakdown of order, moving into the edge of chaos, and the evolution toward a new system dynamic. The breakdown of order and the emergence of order. And that is a collapse process. And there's a name for that in physics. It's called a phase transition. When you go from like liquid to solid, for example, you have a breakdown of order and an emergence of order, and there's a collapse of order as part of that process. So some of the things that we're talking about will be like that. So just saying that that's one of the ways to think about this, that there will be collapses that are about breakdown and destruction. There are also others that are truly about transformation. And then just as a quick comment, because I want to give room for everyone else to speak, I think that we will see throughout the rest of this learning journey, and probably even more important, in this BLC Action Network, how we share how we learn how to do this. Because there's a lot of learning that we already have. There's a lot in the design school. There's also a lot that's outside of the design school. And what we need is active and continual learning exchanges. So just to name that, that's a really big area of focus for us to invest in, to invest time and resources in, is to support these continual learning exchanges. And then, yeah, that's all I'll say for now, because I want to hand over space to other people. But thanks for your comments, and I'm excited we get to walk this path together. So thank you. And then Bruce, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Joe. And everybody's comments are so rich. And the presentation, I think having that strategy, you have to start, and you have to start stepping into it. My art career has kind of afforded me opportunities to work across landscapes. So I have a 10-year relationship with partners in Memphis, probably 15 years in Santa Cruz. I grew up in Glacier National Park. I still have connections there. I'm working across landscapes and scales, and so at a place-based method. And so a lot of these partnerships, if I come from the approach of collapse, they're going to be, we can't, that doesn't fit our business model. And so I'm working with complexity with them, but I have processes to like, that is part of what I do, is creating those bridges. And so I think if there's a way to kind of consider how to adapt a strategy, because all of these scale. And so we can create the bridges that scale. And so just kind of putting out a new lens for, as we come into areas that there's a living complexity there, that's an opportunity. So see if you had any reflections on that.
Just to say, hell yes. And that, as you know, living systems are filled with surprises. The word intelligence, which is this, word often filled with hubris. But if we, like, humans are intelligent and dolphins aren't, some kind of hubris. But when you think of it as system dynamics, it's a system's capacity to generate complexity and surprise us. And when we actually are open to learning, which we must be to work with complexity, we discover there's a lot that we can work with, because living systems are everywhere on the planet. So what I think is really important in what you said is to develop the astuteness of knowing how to talk to different people where they are. And at the same time, to have a collapse-informed strategy. So I don't have to use the word collapse when talking to a specific partner or person, but I need a strategy that is embracing the collapse process as part of what the strategy deals with, to know that what I'm trying to do is at least a resilient strategy within the boundaries of what I know. Because obviously, that's where we bump up against all kinds of problems.
Yeah, for sure. I would just one last thing. So like in Memphis, the Wolf River Conservancy is stewarding the entire Wolf River watershed. And I made an artwork for the Greenway. I basically learned how to design a Greenway from them and how they fund that. And so, that could be a really rich relationship. And there's a site to do educational stewardship.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as you and I talked about briefly a few weeks ago, we've placed Memphis on our map of stops in the Mississippi.
Oh, awesome.
So obviously Memphis has great culture and food, and there are a bunch of reasons to go there. But also historically, it's hugely significant. And I find that the best regenerative work happens in the dark underbelly, the places where the economy is terrible, the places where things are already broken. What I would say is the metaphorical Detroits. Detroit is post-industrial collapse city. So the Mississippi Delta is ripe for transformation. So hell yeah. Thank you, Bruce. And we'll keep rolling through the line here. Colleen, over to you.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much. What a wonderful and inspiring presentation. I just wanted to really quickly put a lens on this regarding how team formation might occur, because I've spent my working life basically building cultures within different organizations, and I don't work with leaders who want to build it from the top down and force it. I only work with leadership teams who understand the emergent properties of human social connection and are willing to take the time to let the natural relationships foster. And so as I think about collapse, what comes to mind is that I feel like, yes, I agree that we are in the midst of it and we have a tiny little needle to thread maybe, but I think that the hope in it, at least for me, is that we iterate the hell out of it and we do it in really small teams, because small teams, I have found in my 30-year career, are the most effective because they're nimble. And if there's any connection between bioregions, it will occur naturally, but that we don't over-design the top of it saying, okay, these big things are going to happen, because it's actually going to come from the little actions we do every day, and then these little generative relationships that we actually can do and activate things with. And so that's the inspiring piece for me, is like sprinting and finding these little iterations and letting that iteration build collectively. So yeah, thank you so much. And I got my fingers crossed on this.
Just want to add a quick comment on something that I learned in complexity science is there are two ways a system changes. What's called symmetry breaking, which is the breakdown of order from the whole system toward the parts, and the rules of interaction of how the parts of the system interact with each other. And if we change the rules of interaction, we get these really dynamic small groups. So
Yeah,
just I want to, that's hugely, hugely important as the larger systems break.
and I'll build on it that complexity science also says that it only takes very simple rules to generate rich complexity. We don't have to over-engineer all these complex, overly burdensome rules. It's a few simple rules inevitably that generate complexity. That's the way life is built, you know? Genetically, we only, all of us are related by the four nucleotides, right? Plants, animals, and then look at all how different we are.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And let's make some small teams. Robert, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And apologies, I've only just arrived, so I missed the end of your presentation, but I look forward to watching it back again. Yeah, just a couple of things. One is well, actually, I was on a call. Actually, it was this call last week, and I think I moved from collapse awareness to collapse acceptance. And I don't think it's just a linguistic shift. It actually was like, oh my God, yes, we are in the thick of this. And yeah, and I mean that's a sort. It's a cognitive shift, but also it feels like a really felt shift as well. But then the metaphor, I suppose, that I'm working with at the moment is rather than collapse, it's metamorphosis. So it's like the metaphor of the caterpillar that consumes all of its environment. It then knows it's time somehow to pupate. It dissolves into a soup, and then it becomes a butterfly. And in the midst of it, there are the imaginal cells that have carried the DNA of the butterfly. The butterfly's immune system tries to destroy them, interestingly, which I think for many of us, that sort of is our felt experience. But eventually, you know, we kind of, not that it's a thing, but we kind of win out, you know, that everything starts moving in that direction. And the reason why for me that's a sort of a helpful picture to hold is that it feels like I retain my agency in the midst of that, that it kind of gives me something to do, whereas collapse feels more like that's just falling down a big hole and there's not much I or anyone else can do about it. So that sort of reframing I'm finding helpful. And then on a sort of a meta level, and I noticed one or two people saying this in the chat, and I certainly have felt like this literally for decades, which is that I feel born for this time. And what that says to me, that, you know, I feel that, other people feel that, on a sort of meta consciousness level, what is happening isn't an accident of history. On some level, it's not, you can't categorize it as being bad, even though it feels pretty terrifying. The fact that there's many of us that feel like we're sort of here and prepared for this time, to me says that there's a bigger consciousness behind this, and actually we're going through a very beautiful time in human history and Earth's history, which isn't to take away from the inherent challenges that this time brings, but it kind of says it helps my nervous system to sort of be okay in the midst of it, because it says actually I think it's going to be okay out the other end of it, but we just need to kind of engage around it. Yeah, so I just wanted to share those couple of thoughts.
Thank you for that. I want to add one little comment that back when I was studying cognitive science really deeply, I came across a book called The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt, who I later actually got to know and met a lot of people in that world. And there was a series of research studies that showed that people's political affiliations can largely be shaped by whether or not they win what Jonathan Haidt called the cortisol lottery, which is just a funny name for some of our bodies neurochemically produce more cortisol and we're more stressed, and others less. and are more experimental and more curious and so forth. And if you have more cortisol, you'll seek stability and order and look for more authoritarian kinds of politics. Whereas if you have less cortisol, you'll be more open, curious, experimental, and more of a risk taker, which would lead into another direction. What I find interesting about that is an example of neurotypic diversity that is genetically determined to give us different behavioral strategies. So within a human population, we'll have different behavioral strategies, and that's a really good thing. That's a really, really good thing. So I love what you're saying, because in a way, it's like there might be some people in this group that are like too curmudgeon-y to be like, Robert, I get you feel that way, but I'm kind of repelled by that. And I'm like, good, let's have different behavioral responses, rather than conformity saying one's right and one's wrong. Because everything you just said is super valuable and functionally adaptive. It's helping you to function and adapt.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So blessings to that, like hell yeah. So that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think this is the era of the neurodivergent, isn't it? And in some senses, again, we think that neurodivergency is arisen because of all the, I don't know, pollutants in the environment or something. But again, I feel as though this is actually all part of a bigger strategy, because we need difference in order to work through this. We need different ways, different perspectives, a different mind other than the one that's got us here. So, all power to the neurodivergence amongst us, which is probably a lot of us here, I suspect.
Well, the neurological term or the neuroscience term is plasticity, neurological plasticity. But you can also have behavioral plasticity, which is that you can change your behavior and adapt it. Humans are the most behaviorally plastic, meaning we're the least programmed in specific behavior and the most adaptive to generate creative behaviors, which is both our strength and our weakness. But here we are. So onward with that. Thank you, Robert. Claire, over to you.
Yeah, gosh, there's just so much that you always open up and are holding, and I just so appreciated that about you, especially Joe, both of you, Joe and Penny. Yeah, I think you started off at the very beginning, maybe even before you started the recording, asking about collapse and how we're experiencing that differently. And I think the thing that keeps standing out to me is just the breakdown in what is the truth telling? Like, where do you actually get your news and your, like, what you can trust? And just what is coming really clear to me, I mean, I think it always has been, but it's really, really landing, is how powerful it is to be place-based and to take authority from the land. And that, for me, that then becomes the minimum viable, we keep referring to this minimum viable process that we need to focus on, is developing that relationship with the land, which is something everybody has access to, because that is the thing that allows, and I learned this by being in rooms with you, Joe, where you were, we were talking to the different mayors, talking about a bioregional strategy. And the thing that I think really got them was that this can be nonpartisan. It can actually help bridge those polarized divides when you are based in a place where you can't mess with the truth. And the problem with getting too abstract is that that actually is part of the problem, is that it can be manipulated in every which way. And so, I just really wanted to give that reflection and see if that prompted anything for you to say, because I so appreciated being there and seeing how powerful that was.
Yeah, one comment on this for me is that reality is coherent to itself. It's whether or not our perception of reality is coherent with reality. And which is where Wetiko, that concept of Wetiko, comes from in the Anishinaabe or the Algonquin languages, rather the Algonquin languages. And what I think is really important in that experience, I remember when we were with those mayors, and I remember thinking of the city of Victoria and the surrounding towns on South Vancouver Island. and how the nested scales also. You can actually go up in scale without necessarily becoming more abstract. Like we could move up to the scale of Vancouver Island or the Salish Sea or Cascadia and still be coherent if our anchoring is in that local way of listening to the land. And it's the scale linking, the linking across scales. It seems like it's going to slip and we're going to lose it, but actually reality is coherent to itself at every scale. And we just need to become coherent with it. So I just wanted to add, I think what you said was beautiful reflection, but also that it does allow us to hold a huge amount of complexity because it's not turning our back on the rest of the world. It's actually seeing how the rest of the world is tethered to us, and which is super powerful. So yeah, just love it.
Yeah, and it's the other thing, I mean, the other way I would say it is that we place the land or the bioregion we're in as the center. It's like, it's what's organizing us. And that's a different worldview. So it's an ecological worldview. And that is the key to all of this, because if we don't do that, then we spin out in our human systems. But if we're organizing to be in alignment with life in our bioregion, then we're organizing around something that's real and not something where we're going to spin out into our human crazy stuff.
Which happens all the time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that too, Penny. Yeah, 100%. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Claire. And then Ed, over to you.
I'm going to change gallery. I don't want to look at myself. Thank you.
You look lovely, Ed. You look lovely.
Big face looking at me. Look, it's funny. I'm just hearing all this, and I mean, I've done meditation for a couple of decades, and collective acceptance. I must admit, I'm sort of going through thinking about it every day, and I love those conversations. I mean, I think Robert, I feel born ready for this moment, or was it at this time? And also, you guys are talking about the less cortisol. And I'm just curious because this strategy, and I understand, I mean, I've been following bioregional planning for 20 years. So listen to the place, I understand this. Collapsed acceptance to me, it sounds like we're talking that it's like a 3-decade sort of horizon. But in terms of scenario testing, scenario planning, if we short circuit that to 3 years or 5 years, are we in a position to have a parallel strategy? Is there a short circuit? Okay, if things go in 5 years time or 3 to 5 years time, I mean, this is where we're going to find out where's the metal, where is that, the Zen that we've been talking about. Now it's in practice, if we're going to have that equanimity and so forth. But is there, do we have a parallel strategy where okay, there's a longer term horizon of, okay, things, I listen to the land, we're sort of, this transnational and building communities and building all these learning centers. I mean, that's great. But if things just go pear-shaped really quickly, do we really have something that's immediate that we can... The urgency is not without freaking out, but there is a sense of urgency. Okay, we're working on two parallel. One is a long term, but one is okay, let's just do something that sort of, I don't know, that sort of prepare ourselves. That's around the corner.
Well, one of the
does
things
that make sense? I mean, am I sort of without freaking out anybody? Maybe there's too much cortisol happening here, but
I think there's a lot to it that people have already been experiencing. An example is we had someone come to a design immersion in Barichara last year, Salvador Perez, who lives in Valencia, Spain. And in late 2024, there was a massive flood that basically destroyed the city. Right. So he had lived through a disaster and was really building toward resilience and regeneration. So one of the things for us now is to recognize that this wave of disasters that is happening, I won't even say the ones that are coming, they're happening. They will just continue. It'll just sort of be true that now they're happening, and then in 2 years, they're happening, and then in 5 years, they're happening. So the question becomes, how do these disasters and crises become the crucibles of transformation? so that when we're in them, we're moving toward place-based, local, regenerative, and all of these things that we need to do. But also, if we're not in one now, how are we preparing for whichever one may come? And so that we're sort of we're hedging our bets for both. But the way that we do it without panic, part of it is to become collapse accepting. Because part of the psychology of collapse acceptance is that you're no longer trying to avoid something because you think it can still be avoided. And so you can have these different loops of emotional and cognitive response that are actually wasting energy. You know, it's like we say worrying is wasting energy. Once you know what the threat is, you don't actually use more energy worrying about it, which in meditation is really hard to stop, but there it is. So part of this is collapse acceptance frees up our energy, which is a huge deal. It's a huge deal. And when we're in these crises, we could go back and rebuild backwards. Like, oh, let's just rebuild a city in the floodplain that's going to flood again next year, you know, like that sort of thing, which is really bad strategies. They're really unadaptive. So part of this is to convey the intelligence of what are actually adaptive strategies. We froze for a second. I hope the sound got through. But part of it is cultivating a capacity in ourselves. Like a little thing I do, which has changed my life, is I always loved being around little kids. And I have a daughter, so I've got an excuse. I can just go be around my daughter and other little kids. But we created a school for kids, and now anytime I need that nourishment, I can bathe myself in the beauty of a dog pile of a bunch of 5-year-olds jumping on me with hugs. And I actually love that regardless of what's happening in the world. So there are these little gifts we can give ourselves by knowing that they're just good for us, but also they're good for the work. And when we can find those things together, we're doing the collapse preparedness, the disaster response, the resilience planning, you know, all of it.
And then it's all holistically included in what we're talking about. Like the bioregional learning ecosystem, the bioregional learning center, the funding and governance systems, like it's all the same thing we're talking about. And that includes that we have to do exactly what we're talking about. We have to deal with the collapse as it's happening. We have to prepare for it. And this might be a way in, you know, to certain groups in our area that they're starting to think about that, you know, so you're starting to weave with that as a doorway in, but you're starting to also weave for the next, you know, becoming regenerative, creating the regenerative culture over these decades. And
yeah, and just as a tactic of this learning journey, if a big disaster hits where any of our participants are, there might be mobilizing of support for this into that place among people here who've gotten to know each other by being in a community call together. So just naming that we might get real opportunities to practice because we don't know where the disasters are going to hit or when in the next few months. And so what a scary thought in one level, but what an exciting opportunity to be part of something, knowing that we've been preparing ourselves beforehand. Because they're coming, the disasters are coming. So, like I said, they're already here. They're just in different places. But yeah, thank you, Ed.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
And Madeline, over to you.
Hi, thanks. So just to pick up from that, I just wanted to say that somebody said, I can't remember, that the collapse is already here, it just isn't evenly distributed. Mm-hmm. So I think that's just an excellent way to think about it. You know, I've noticed for decades that when we want to do a good thing, whatever that is, we often look around and go, oh, but nobody's doing it with me, and I tried, and where is everybody else? And that can even lead to resentment and really horrible things. But mostly it leads to lack of agency. And I think we worry about it too much. And for two reasons. One is the dandelion, right? I mean, the best we can do is be a dandelion seed ourselves. And that's good enough. And um, it's also that like what's life for, right? If it's for meaning, then whatever we would do will give our lives meaning. And that, in a way, means we're living in a time where we're called to meaning much more than our society has asked us to live in meaning. I mean, all we do now is shop and surf and like and, selfie, right? That is not meaning. So, like, leaving that behind, and having that collapse is not a bad thing, right? So, and I don't think we could just make Facebook collapse. So what are we looking at here? So I also want to just touch for a moment, and I'm sure you can do a better job of this than I can, Joe. That you know we talk about what are the chances that this is going to work, and it's related to what I just said, but also the chances that life was ever going to evolve the way it did on Earth is pretty low. And there were a lot of things that were interacting to make that happen. If the moon hadn't been here and moving further out, and how that changed the time of day, and like just the bazillions of things that happened, some of which we know and most of which we don't. The reality is we have no idea where this is going, and we don't have to know, and maybe it's better not to know. And you know, if we can, befriend the part of us that wants to know, and just say thanks for your help. You know, like, we'll be friends forever, but we don't need to know, right? And uh so that, and then and related to that, um expecting to know what's going to happen in collapse is crazy because it's going to be chaotic, and that's kind of the definition of collapse. But I can't help thinking about it anyway, or at least the part of me that wants to know. And so I play scenarios and I go, well, if this happens before that, well, okay, so for example, what's going on in Iran, and if it causes the oil shock that we know is coming, and if that oil shock is bad enough, well, guess what? Maybe the data centers will have to slow down, and maybe that reduces the risk of AI. And like they all kind of feed into each other in a way that okay, we know collapse is coming. We know there are multiple concurrent global systems that are collapsing, all for their own reasons, but also interrelated. And depending on how they sequence, we might get better or worse outcomes depending on, what we're voting for. So yeah, I was really moved by this whole thing today. Penny, your presentation was amazing, and I had been asking in the comments for points that I might raise in a Substack post or section about this, and I'm just going to go back to those, and and work
Yeah.
with those. So yeah, thanks.
You just said so many beautiful things that I will not say more to, except to just be like, yeah, like Penny did this, but also that if we remember the innocence of childhood, sometimes you step outside and you stop and a butterfly bizarrely lands on your nose and you giggle, which is just to say sometimes really beautiful things just happen. And maybe that's what happened to our planet 3.6 billion years ago. A beautiful little accident just happened. And in a way, it's like you said, just the fact that it was highly improbable didn't stop it from happening, did it? And so, yeah, I felt when you said that, I felt that beautiful innocence of Albert Einstein, how he was known to like play games and ride his bike in circles, even as an old man. And he was just like a silly little kid in some ways, but also he came to really believe in God because of how unlikely it all was. That was actually what him being a scientist is what took him there. And so just to say, yeah, that's a beautiful thought. So thank you.
Thank you.
And then Bree, over to you.
Bree.
Hi, everyone. I'm just soaking up all of it. Feeling really grateful for that energy that's swirling right now that is pointing to the fact that we're here in divine time. You know, the collapse that we're swirling in is here for a reason. And I think it's helping us see things that we can't otherwise see without being here in the first place. So thanks for all being here with me and my daughter. I'm going to speak about my daughter in the moment. Like Joe, I have a reason to hang out with a young woman who is seeing the world in a way that there's hope. And ultimately, I'm feeling a little bit like a Coco Pelli. We just came back from a couple of weeks down at the Four Corners in the sacred canyon lands to be with water in a bioregion that is not water abundant. In the way people think water abundance is real, and to connect with the headwaters and the rivers of the Colorado, many of the waters, and that just leads me to feel the spirit of the Coco Pelli. You know, I'm 100% in with this journey where we are. The Coco Pelli brings joy with it, with their flute. You know, in the Southwest, whether it's the Hopi as a fertility deity or the Zuni as a rain symbol, or the Navajo as a harvest symbol, there's an energy that my daughter and I are super excited to continue with the watershed work. I feel like within this collapse awareness, connecting as waterkin within our watersheds is paramount. Many of you know that Becky Big Canoe is launching her kinship way, so that's an overlay onto this work where that we can connect as kin with a governance system in our watersheds. And I'm just very much looking forward to catching up and flowing with you all as we, percolate and cycle through. I love the word circulation that you used earlier, Joe, and how there's a circulatory system that wants to be created. The Bioregional Learning Center that is percolating here will hold that flow through energy to weave and connect. So big thanks for everything that's flowing, and looking forward to flowing forward with you all.
I can feel, as Madeline said, we can just be the dandelion seeds, and that's actually beautiful enough. And I was like, and Bree, you're just such a dandelion seed. So I just wanted to say that. It's lovely to see you. And then Neil, over to you.
Thanks, Joe and Penny. Fantastic job today, Joe, describing the cross-scale linkages and the longer time frame. But just picking up on Ed's point before, Ed Niembro's point, I think the real and present danger that many are currently feeling will differ for each of us. But is somebody going to come across the border at me? Is the oil going to run out? Is my food security intact, and if so, for how long? So the work that Anne and I are doing, and for those that may not know, we are helping to host the integration sessions. Excuse me. But we also have the Courageous Conversations, is holding space for exactly this diversity of perspectives while we experience our real grief in real time. And it's also looking at what is it we need to do urgently versus more slowly, and what are no regret strategies, and those sorts of questions. We're trying to work at those multiple cross-time scales, not just cross-scale linkages here in the work we're doing in Leuven. So because of our work here, we're now starting to be seen as potentially influential in shifting the nature of the policy discussions and in shifting the nature of the way we host space in conferences and in workshops. And so part of the other thing we've done this week was to actually order literally a home stove to go in to fit back into the old chimney, which was removed a few years ago. Order the firewood in advance. We've got fuel and a generator now because we know that this is coming. So these are urgent, short-term personal resilience, and we've got the privilege to do that, and we need to be doing that. If we are not safe enough to be doing the work, we can't help those that aren't safe enough to be doing the work. And so we have to be holding all of that simultaneously. So I just wanted to point to that I feel you, Ed, in terms of where you're at. We know this is coming, and this is not just the climate change elements. This is also the geopolitical strife, the genocides, the wars, everything going on all at once, everywhere, different ways of showing up, and how we hold space for that is critical to this, because we have to respect how we fold that back into our short-term, medium-term, and long-term efforts. And it's a pleasure to be here with you all and to see this strategy unfolding. And we're, absolutely privileged to be walking alongside and feeling that Anne and I are really in the right place at the right time with the right gifts after a lot of hard-won experience to be holding space for these sorts of conversations. So thank you so much. Love you all.
I just want to say, can I get an amen? And yes, this is, it should be obvious now why we partnered in the way we did with Anne and Neil. So thank you for that, Neil. Very appropriate, very helpful. And Ralph, over to you.
Thanks, Penny. Thanks, Joe. First of all, thank you for making the comment around Mila and sort of like helping us in our grieving. I think today's session was also very important for me to sort of mirror what you're doing and what we're doing at R3.0 and how it co-creates sort of the universe of bioregionalism in a certain way together. The thought that came up was really a bioregional learning center that is already quite something. And you were mentioning a couple of things of how do I find people? How can I create something that is, a soft start into something? And I just wanted to mention that with last year's conference, we had the idea of the confluences and had more than 50 of them organized in local places on 6 different continents, I think like 25 different countries. So from that perspective, this incentive of the conference that we're organizing and bringing people together in confluences is a way to bring people together that have not met before. And we've seen that in dozens of these confluences where people really met for the first time. Some of them were better organized, some of them less organized. Some of them said, hey, I take this as an incentive to bring people together and see what their networks are and get us all together into a conference. And from last year, we know that some of them started to work more or come closer to the idea of creating bioregional learning centers afterwards. And one of the other things that also happened is that in the run-up of this year's conference, we were going to do this process again. And what is very nice to see is that from the round about 20 confluences that are now registered, 15 of them are completely new ones. So again, people being incentivized to just screen a conference and build a program around that then leads them in a, I would say, a smooth way into the idea of, hey, should we not meet more regularly? Should we not think about creating a bioregional learning center in the place that we're at? So I just wanted to mention that there is, there are many ways of getting, softly into the idea of gathering, of coming together, of later on creating a process and creating bioregional learning centers, then becoming part of the design school. And I think I would say I at least know a dozen or more people that joined the design school afterwards for more guidance around that. So I just want to acknowledge that, there is this co-creation of that web or fabric of bioregional learning centers through those different sorts of approaches that we have, and where we both create 1 + 1, making it 3. And so it's another Dandelion strategy, I would say. So I'm just acknowledging, and I'm just trying to recapture what I learned today and how we at R3.0 can help and support that idea. And by the way, also just want to mention it to everybody, becoming lifelong members of the design school to also activate your pilgrimages.
Thanks, Ralph. I just wanted to say, I've been thinking a lot about this morning, actually.
She actually did a Miro board
A
diagram.
major diagram.
So it's serious.
But just thinking about that, what I feel like we're talking about is sort of like that activate stage that we talked about in the presentation.
Yep.
That there's many ways people are getting activated through the design school, through our 3.0 confluences, through like the bioregioning course that's happening. The
People learning about bioregioning,
in
the
practice,
BioPi project, and other
through
places.
BioPi practice, through high-low. I mean, there's like many ways people are starting to come into this. And I think what would benefit us is if we coordinated a little better, across these
We know
these
you know
efforts,
this.
because there's like 20 communities people have to join, and that whole thing. But I think that what you're naming is the activation stage. And then if we can scaffold toward, like, as people are getting activated in a coordinated way toward, like, for example, building a BLC. And how do you do that? And what does it mean? And what all these how questions that come up, then we can actually build like a movement where it's happening in the Dandelion strategy. So
yeah.
I think the activation is happening in multiple ways through multiple platforms.
And we need more of it. So yeah, because I feel like going from whatever the number of baby BLCs and young BLCs are out there, which is probably somewhere between like 10 and 20 right now, and then probably a few thousand places that are BLC like. Oh, there's this permaculture center that is like a BLC, but they're not quite, but really they could become it fairly easily, or rather they could orient themselves that way, that we could get to 1,000 BLCs pretty fast, actually. Even though
I think so too.
Even though they're just seeds.
Yeah.
We can get to 1,000 of these place-based seeds very quickly. I think that's very possible.
And I feel like what our 3.0 and the design school did last year, in the way that we had the design immersions as part of the learning journey, and then the confluences came at the end of the learning journey.
Also, the dialogues and speaking series of our 3.0 that were outside the design school.
And the conference itself, like this is a way that we can synergize that activation. It's like the activation is happening in multiple places, but then we're synergizing toward real action and coordinated action.
Yeah. So that and hugs for your family.
No, yeah. I think it was an important session for me to also, just again reflect and mirror how we can coordinate even better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And the idea of a bioregional coherence month in September, which emerged in a conversation we were having together, that's a good idea. So thank you, Ralph, and to be continued.
Yeah, it actually emerged in an operations teams call between Bill and myself, and he said, let's test it. And there it is.
Yeah, and here we go. Thank you, Ralph, and then Michelle, over to you.
Yeah, I just had an experience yesterday that seemed a little bit like a metaphor for what some of the comments that I've been hearing. So basically, my husband and I were traveling, and we made stops at the Upper Grand is the source water of the Grand River watershed, and we stopped there. And then the road intersected the river at another place, and we stopped. And then we came upon this it by all appearances, and probably truly was, extractive agricultural operation for huge scale farming, and the corn was still sitting there, and it was all muddy, and there were hundreds and hundreds of tundra swans.
I saw the picture. Yeah, I saw your picture.
Yeah. Only with my cell phone. Like, you should always carry binoculars and boots. But they're migrating, and in my head, I didn't think that there were those numbers. I tend to exaggerate, and my husband tends to be very realistic. He corrected me when I said hundreds of swans. He said probably thousands. So that journey, we don't know what we're going to discover in it, and if we go together, we won't be alone.
Thank you for that, Michelle, and thank you everyone for these lovely, lovely conversations that we're having. And I have not had a chance to look through that, what looks like a massive chat that we will share the recording, we'll share the text of. I wanted to bring today's session to a close by saying, we're actually serious. Like I said, on Friday, Penny and I get on an airplane and we fly to Tunisia because Elias told us several months ago, so we're creating a BLC, will you come? And we're like, yeah, we'll come. So just to say, we're serious. We're really doing this. And as you could feel from just the practical nature of what Ralph shared a few moments ago, that actually this activation process has already been underway. And what is happening now is the coordination at a narrative level is happening. The ability to see the story. For some reason, my eyes scanned to August on the screen, who I talked to him and his friends 2 weeks ago about a BLC in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in Colombia. Just to say it is in the air and it is in the water right now, that this wants to be born. It's in the noosphere, for those of you who know what that is. The collective awareness of humanity is saying, let's create bioregional learning centers, shall we? And so you can just really feel it. And the fact that I'm saying this in the English language does not limit it. Yesterday, I talked to someone from France. He's like, we don't have that name, but I know what you're talking about and we can do that. Just like when I talk to people in Colombia in Spanish, they use a different name, but you know what? We're talking about the same thing. And so our ability to do this is real and imminent. And we're doing it. So we're glad to be doing it together. And that's my closing comment for us is, I want us to just notice the joy of seeing each other, giving our comments and testimonials to each other. We are not alone in this at all. And honestly, if more people knew about this, if they knew there was a real alternative to just freaking out about the news, I think we're going to have a lot of people come to this. We just have to create beautiful places and beautiful projects, or the millions of them that already exist. Let's make those more visible, please, because they're out there. Just with permaculture sites, there's probably 500,000 in the world or something, let alone all the other things. So it's huge. It's huge. And what we need is a coherent story to bring us into alignment with the earth, which is different from, oh, it's the story of that person or that organization. No, it's the earth. She is telling us how to organize ourselves. She's like, I made bioregions for you. Why don't you guys use those to organize? Yeah. We're like, thanks, Mom. You know, it's like that. So thanks, Mom. Thanks, Madre Tierra. Thanks, Pachamama. And yeah, we look forward to exploring and manifesting this together through the learning journey and beyond. And thank you everyone today for a beautiful session, and we'll see you soon.